You're listening to Romancing in Paris on Paris Underground Radio.
Hello, and welcome to the Romancing in Paris podcast. I'm your host, Lily Heise. In this podcast, we'll be traveling around the city as I pick out my top romantic spots per arrondissement. You don't have to visit these places only as a couple. Exploring them can be the expression of your own love of Paris. Are you ready to get romancing in Paris? Hello, and welcome back to Romancing in Paris. In our last episode, we visited the chic 16th district of Paris and went to a very special theatre which is found there. In today's show, we're heading over to the neighboring district, the 17th. On the surface, this large, mostly residential arrondissement, located in the northwest of the city, might not seem to have oodles of romantic appeal. However, it has a diverse range of romantic gems. The district brings together grand Haussmannian elegance. In the section close to the Arc de Triomphe, the charming village-like areas of Les Batignolles, discussed in our first round of the arrondissements, and the up-and-coming Les Epinettes neighborhood. And then, in between these, is a particularly intriguing area, which is not even known by many Parisians. This is where we are going to venture today, and specifically, a little-known place, which is ideal for an original romantic outing. Grab your chérie, we're going to the Musée Henner. Haven't heard of the Musée National Jean-Jacques Henner, have you? You probably haven't even heard of Jean-Jacques Henner either. Well, it's one of Paris's most under-the-radar museums, which is part of the wonderful collection of former art studio museums which exists in the city, like the Musée Bourdelle, which we visited a few episodes ago, and Gustave Moreau, which we've also covered. The Musée Bourdelle is particularly romantic thanks to its outdoor spaces and the love story which I uncovered about Antoine Bourdelle. In the case of the Musée Henner, it's the ambience of this enchanting space and the subject matter of the art Henner painted, which makes this museum an ideal date spot. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let's learn a little about the history of this fascinating, yet virtually unknown area of Paris called La Plaine Monceau, and more about this artist, who was one of the most famous artists of the turn of the 20th century. As we've discussed in other episodes of the podcast, Paris underwent an immense urban boom during the mid-1800s. The city expanded to its current size, gobbling up the small villages and fields which previously encircled the capital. Much of this development, overseen by the prefect Baron Haussmann, took place in the center and the west of the newly expanded city, like those elegant buildings near the Arc de Triomphe I mentioned earlier on. However, after those large buildings were put in, a trend for individual homes, or rather mansions, became popular, especially in the later decades of the 19th century, during the period known as La Belle Epoque, or the Beautiful Era, which spanned between the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and World War I. This was an era of rapid technological advancements, which were accompanied by the innovative concept that this beautiful new society should be composed of a mix of industrialists, academics, and artists of all genres. And La Plaine Monceau became the center of this collaborative new world. The whole neighborhood is inhabited by artists, painters, sculptors, musicians, and men of letters. It's a paradise of art, a corner of Paris that tourists who visit will never forget. This quote by writer Alexis Martin in his Guide to the Districts of Paris published in 1890 beautifully encapsulates La Plaine Monceau at that time. By the turn of the 20th century, more than 2,000 artistic figures lived in the trendy district. These included composer Claude Debussy, world-famous actress Sarah Bernhardt, writers Guy de Maupassant and Alexandre Dumas fils. If you turn down one particular street, you might catch sight of Frederick Auguste Bartholdi's Statue of Liberty rising out of the buildings of Gaget, Gautier and Company, the foundry where the statue was created. Just another example of art and technology coming together. Now, La Plaine Monceau's artists weren't avant-garde bohemian ones like Renoir, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Van Gogh. They were living over in the scruffy hill of Montmartre. La Plaine Monceau attracted successful bourgeois artists who were members of the Académie des Beaux-Arts. They followed the accepted norms of the times. They had commissions from the state and wealthy patrons. These artists could afford the opulent homes of this fashionable new neighborhood. Unfortunately, over the years, many of these sumptuous mansions have been destroyed to make way for larger, more profitable housing blocks. Nevertheless, one can get a glimpse into this exciting time period at one of the few of these residences which have been preserved, and which is open to the public. Yes, you've got it, le Musée Henner. The museum's building was originally built for Guillaume Duboff, the third generation of a line of prominent 19th century artists. You might have actually seen Duboff's work if you've ever dined at Le Train Bleu, the gorgeous restaurant of the Gare de Lyon, which we covered in recent episodes. He was one of the artists who worked on its elaborate, soaring, beautiful paintings. Duboff's residence is not only a great example of the mansions built here, but also of a studio home, a new architectural concept which put the studio at the forefront of an artist's house in order to facilitate entertaining one's potential customers. Studio visits were popular at the times, and especially in La Plaine Monceau. Guillaume Duboff's salon was one of the most frequented. Duboff died in 1909, towards the end of the Belle Epoque. However, the museum isn't dedicated to him, but instead to a fellow late 19th century artist, Jean-Jacques Henner, whose erstwhile fame, like Duboff's, has since been far eclipsed by the Impressionists. Henner's studio was in the Pigalle area. However, he spent time in La Plaine Monceau. Duboff's former studio was specifically chosen by his niece and heir for a museum in Henner's honor, as it embodied the ambiance of his era. Let's learn a little bit about this prolific artist before we stop by the museum. Born in 1829 to a family of Alsatian farmers, Henner's artistic talent was noticed by the drawing teacher at his school. Henner was given extra art lessons and pursued a career as an artist thanks to a grant from the Council of the Haute-Rhin department, where he lived, to study at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. After 2 failed attempts, Henner won the prestigious Prix de Rome, which allowed him to spend 5 years at the Villa Medici. His time in Italy, with travels to Florence and Naples, and all the art he absorbed, heavily influenced his work. Although his style, which combined idealism, realism, and references to the Italian Renaissance, was not completely in line with the official style of the Académie, Henner went on to have an illustrious career, notably for his historic paintings and portraits. He passed away in 1905, but it wasn't until 1921 that his niece purchased the Duboff studio home to establish the museum. If you're enjoying this episode of Romancing in Paris, you may also like to listen in to our sister podcast, The Heart of You, an engaging show about spirituality and divination. Romancing in Paris will be right back after a word from our sponsors.
And now, back to Romancing in Paris.
I think it's about time we stop by to have a look. You can reach the museum by taking Metro Line 3 to Malesherbes. Exiting the station, you'll be in Place du Général 4, a medium-sized square in the heart of La Plaine Monceau. The square itself is flanked by mansions from the era, including the one that houses the Cité de l'Économie, a museum also open to the public. But I have to say, economy isn't a very romantic topic. A short walk up Avenue de Villiers will take you to a brick and stone building, the museum. I suggest gazing up at its tall windows before entering. The first room of the museum sets the tone by providing more information about the Plaine Monceau and its residents. You'll then enter the regal Salon des Colonnes, a columned room in a neo-Renaissance style, which gives way to the enchanting winter garden. Covered with a glass roof, it was here where Duboff used to entertain his guests. As you meander to the upper floors, you will see the artist's evolution, works from his time in Rome, and his various figurative paintings. The Red Room, Duboff's former bedroom, features seductive red walls and arabesque elements, as well as displaying some discreetly sensual paintings. The top floor art studio is a magical space as well. I have a fondness, though, for the exotic central patio, which is evocative of North African architecture, and the perfect place to steal a kiss. If you would like to visit the museum in an extra special way, I actually lead a behind-the-scenes experience at the museum within the portfolio of journeys offered by Secret Journeys. The exclusive tour explores La Plaine Monceau of the Belle Epoque and how Henner is exemplary of the archetype of the artists of the period. The visit ends in the Winter Garden, where we will view some special items from the museum's archives over a glass of champagne, perhaps just like the guests who might have visited the fabulous studio home 100 years ago. See the Secret Journeys website for more information. Alternatively, the museum has a wonderful calendar of events, from concerts of music from the era to art workshops. They also have an artist in residence, whose work you might encounter during your visit. After you're done at the museum, you could take an amble through some of the neighboring streets, like Rue Fortuny, to spot other mansions guided by the information in the first room of the museum. If you drift a little further northwest, you will also reach the Square des Batignolles, covered in the previous episode which I mentioned. Thank you for listening to this latest episode of Romancing in Paris. If you have a minute, please rate or review it. It's extremely helpful for attracting potential new listeners. You can find more great ideas for romantic things to do in Paris and around the world on my website, Je T'aime Me Neither, and check out the wonderful other podcasts on the Paris Underground Radio Network. Until next time, happy romancing in Paris.
This episode of Romancing in Paris was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio. For more on this show and shows like it, please visit parisundergroundradio.com.